Hi everyone, I'm Ava and I'm an American living in the Netherlands. And today I want to talk about why I will not be moving back to the US at least anytime soon. So a bit of background to this is that a couple of weeks ago I visited the US, just a short trip to see my family, and I was kind of curious about what I would think when I was there because it was only my second time back since I moved to the Netherlands. Thanks, COVID. But regardless, it had been a while since I had gone back, and I was curious to see if my impressions of the US had changed since I had lived in the Netherlands for a while. I was also curious about whether I would develop feelings of wanting to move back to the US, so I was particularly attuned to how I felt there. And what I want to share with you is how I was surprised to find that even though I love the US, I am American, I love the culture that I grew up in, but I was surprised that I overwhelmingly felt that I wasn't ready to leave the Netherlands and that I really wanted to continue living in the Netherlands because I felt that there was a better fit. So in this video, I want to talk about that. I came up with a few reasons why I felt this way. Some of them are very personal, others are a bit more systematic and at a societal level. But before I get into that, thank you Italki for sponsoring today's video. Now, I'm really excited to work with Italki because Italki is a language learning platform and I'm a linguist and I love all things about language learning. Now, what I like about Italki is that they offer one-on-one conversations. So if you are someone who needs a native speaker or an advanced speaker of the language you're trying to learn, this is the perfect place to find one. Now, what's great about Italki is that they're running a special in September so that if you take your first lesson in September, you will be eligible for a lottery for free lessons for 3 whole months. 40 lucky winners will get free lessons worth a total of 305 euros. And if you don't know, on Italki, that's actually quite a lot because I find that the lessons are reasonably priced. I mean, especially if you're thinking about the fact that these are one-on-one personalized conversation lessons. And I've used Italki myself in the past, so I can definitely recommend that. So here's some great highlights about Italki that I want to share with you to kind of give you a feel for what the platform is like. Well, the first thing is that in addition to these lessons on the side, you can also practice for free with the Italki community. So that is a nice plus. And I want to mention their trial lessons because I actually really like that you can get 3 trial lessons when you sign up and they start from as low as €1. So that's pretty great. This gives you a nice opportunity to try out the platform and see if this is something for you. And I already mentioned the September campaign that they have going on. So if you take that first lesson in September, you'll be eligible for this lottery and you will maybe get to take lessons for 3 months for free. I love the word free, so I cannot promote this campaign enough. So to try that out, click on the description box below and use the link that I've included down there for you. What's also nice is that if you use my code Dutch, you will get $5 off when you make a purchase worth $10. So that's also a nice additional incentive to go ahead, click on that link in the description box below and check out Italki. It's actually surprisingly easy to register on their platform. Okay, now back to why I will not be moving to America anytime soon. If you are Dutch or European and you're watching this, just be happy in general, because as I was writing down some of these things, I thought, man, the US still has a long way to go. And of course, the Netherlands, for instance, I live here, so I can say this, that it's not perfect. It's pretty great, but it's by no means perfect, and every place has something to work on. But in comparison, I feel like I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to live here because things are a whole lot better. So enough of that intro. The first thing I want to share with you today is how I find that Americans tend to have more superficial friendships. Now, maybe you've heard in some of my videos that I talk about how Americans like to do a lot of small talk. Hey, how are you? And how are you is used so often that it just means hello. It's not a real question. But besides that, you think that, okay, these small talks are a great way to have conversations, meet new people. I mean, I actually believe that. I think there's a nice function of these small talks. But do you ever get past that? And sometimes I will say yes, but here are some issues that I've had as an adult. So in college, I found it pretty easy to make friends and also form deeper friendships because I think people just were all in one place at the university campus. And, we had classes together, same in high school. But what happens after that? And I've had this conversation with many Americans who live in the US, and we've realized that friendships in adulthood tend to be way more superficial. So what will happen is that you'll meet someone, maybe you'll have the best time ever, you'll have this great connection, and you'll just see sparks flying in your friendship. After you've had this great connection and meeting with this new person, what I find happens in the Netherlands is that people then frequently will ask you to hang out, or they'll, make plans with you. And of course, the Dutch have their own friend group built in already, so it's very hard to get to that point. But if you have a connection with someone, you've had a great time, you most likely will be invited to their birthday or something, something or another. It's not that they just forget about you. In America, they forget about you. I cannot tell you how many times I've had the same conversation with people. We'll have this nice time, and then at the end we'll be like, oh my God, we should do this again. You think we're gonna do it again? No. And the funny thing is, both parties know that that's not going to happen. There are very few instances where you actually follow up on that. But generally, if you have a nice time and then afterwards, you're parting ways, you just say, hey, we should do this again sometime. Or afterwards, when you message them about something random, you might say like, let's catch up soon. I mean, what are you gonna catch up on? You've met this person a couple of times, like once. But you always say that, and then it will never happen. If you're European, you might be thinking, this sounds very strange. Why do they do that? Now, there's a perfectly good explanation for this. Just kidding. There's no explanation for this. I have no idea why this happens, but it happens so often. Number 2 on the list is the fact that in the US, you have to drive everywhere. I mean, sure, if you're lucky enough to live in the city, great. But then if you want to leave the city, tough luck. Good luck trying to get a train or a bus out of whichever nice city you live in. Because the easiest way to get around in America is honestly just by driving. Here in the Netherlands, not the case. I can just show up to the train station without reserving tickets in advance and go places. Yes, it's expensive, but do you think it's any cheaper to take the train in the US? It is not. Do you think it's more efficient to take the train in the US? It is not. So I am very happy with what I have. I could see that, maybe the trains could be made cheaper, but in the US, it's just expensive. And honestly, if you wanted to get between New York and, let's say, Washington, DC, and you wanted to take the train, it's going to, first of all, be like 3 to 4 times more expensive than the bus. And it's probably going to be late, the Amtrak. And you would need to reserve at least 3 or 4 weeks in advance. And Americans don't like to plan, so I don't know why they thought this was a good idea. Like, it would probably work better in the Netherlands, where you don't need to do this. You just hop on the train. Even if you want to go to another country, you can reserve not that far in advance. And yes, there are also buses, but these trains and buses only go so far. And I understand that the US is really big, but because of it, you do have to drive everywhere. It's a driving country, and there's some places where the trains and buses just don't go there. So my parents decided, no idea why they decided this, but they decided to move to upstate New York from New York City. I know. I mean, and they live in the mountains, and it's all really beautiful. Like, for those of you who don't know, upstate New York is gorgeous, has a lot of great nature. But you have to drive. Like where my parents live, I can't take the train all the way there. They have to come pick me up because I don't drive. Now, this second thing is something that I've also just noticed from talking to friends who live in the US. So it's not just from my trip there, but my trip there definitely brought this to light again. And that is that Americans are so obsessed with the rat race, like their careers, and that is really their main focus. Now, of course, there's like better work-life balance in Europe, and that is something that I talk about. But what I didn't realize until, I went back, and then all the conversations that I've had with my friends came up to the surface again, is that for Americans, for a lot of Americans, work is their number one priority. So if they could make a life choice, like to move abroad or to do something fun, and that jeopardized their work, or that meant that they couldn't spend more time at their work, they wouldn't choose to do that other thing because work is number one priority. And also, they're always trying to get ahead of everybody else. I also think that there's something to be admired about ambition. That's definitely a great quality, but this is everybody. So if you are someone who wants a bit more balance or who doesn't subscribe to that rat race, then you're gonna have a hard time living in the US. Because when I was there, for instance, when I was getting my PhD, I felt like I had to be doing all of these things all the time that came with the program, publishing, working all the time. Like, it was a badge of honor that you wore when you could say like, oh, I worked late last night, I pulled an all-nighter. And Here, I think people would just be like, well, why? Did you really need to do that? They would question your priorities. And I think that's healthier for me personally. So I think for that reason, I wouldn't be able to go back to the US and work there and immediately dive into the US working culture. Number 4, I decided to pull this out as a separate point because it irks me to the very core. And that has to do with not just leave in general, but maternity leave or birth leave, family leave for when you as a family gives birth. Well, the person with the uterus gives birth, and then the partner of the person with the uterus, if they have one, like how much time do they get to spend with this offspring that they've created? What an interesting choice of terminology there, but we're just gonna go with it. So in the US, you are protected for up to 12 weeks of family leave. This is eligible for both the person with the uterus and their partner. However, it is with 0% pay. That's suspension, right? Like, you're getting penalized for doing the one thing the human species is supposed to do, reproduce. Now, I will say that some states have taken it into their own hands to pay the people who need family leave a percentage of their salary. So this is 50% in New York State. I know that for a fact. But 50% is not that much. Now, in the Netherlands, you as the person with the uterus giving birth, you get 16 weeks in total. And here's the nice part, you're required to take 4 of those weeks at least before you give birth. Not in America. I've seen people ready to pop, like they work until the last minute. Listen, I admire these people with uteruses, never know what the plural is, who work until the very last minute. How are they doing this? But in the US, you're kind of forced to do that because you can take leave after, unpaid leave, by the way. Now, in the Netherlands, you get 16 weeks in total. 4 of those are before. Now, as a partner, recently, there have been some great changes where you get 6 weeks, and this is a bit more complicated. The first week, you get off immediately, and I think that is full pay, and the remaining 5 weeks is with 70% pay. 70% pay is not great, but now when I compare it to what I could have had in the US as a partner of someone with a uterus, I think to myself, I'll take the 70%. And it also doesn't vary depending on what state you live in. Although how funny would it be in the Netherlands if they had different laws based on the provinces? In Limburg, you could take 6 weeks with 80% pay. And in South Holland, you could do that with, 20% pay. That would be ridiculous. I don't see that working here. Anyway, but it is funny to think about the US as this like huge thing where things vary so much. So it is hard to, make general statements, period, but it's harder to do that in the US because every city and state is so different. So that's also something to keep in mind. Now, you listen to the US's maternity leave policies and you think to yourself, wow, the US is lagging behind. And it's true. And this is not the only thing that they lag behind in. And these are the things that also irk me. So 2 of the things that I thought of was, which are both very current, is one is that there's still people in the US who don't believe in climate change. They still need to be convinced of it. And I don't know. So the country as a whole lacking behind in that. And the second one is recently there was this abortion ban in Texas. So as a person with a uterus, I am offended by this abortion ban. And yes, it's in Texas, but I don't know how it's going to apply to the rest of the country. This is what I was talking about. It's so hard to talk about the US in general, where the states are also semi-autonomous or autonomous to some degree. So yeah, interesting, right? This happened really recently. I don't know what to say about that. It's also a very strange ban, and it has some really weird components to it where it makes citizens into bounty hunters where they can sue people who've assisted in abortion. This is like the most American type of ban I've heard. Like, I'm gonna sue you and get money out of it. Like, no. This next thing I wanted to talk about is something that took me by surprise. And it didn't take me by surprise because I didn't know that it was a thing. It took me by surprise because I didn't expect to feel that way. I'd completely forgotten about it. And that was the feeling of feeling unsafe so often. Now in the Netherlands, I've gotten used to feeling safe most of the time. Now in the US, that's not the case. The moment it is dark, I feel so unsafe. And I didn't expect that. It also comes from the fact that there's a lot of gun violence and violence in general in the US. So the statistics also just support that. It's not that, it's not just a feeling, it's also supported by the amount of violence and crime that happens in the US versus the Netherlands. Now, personally, when I lived in Philadelphia, I was actually jumped and mugged on the street. I know you may be thinking rite of passage living in the big city, but it was actually pretty traumatic. It took me some time to recover from that experience because someone, when I say jumped, maybe you don't know what that means, but let's say someone attacked me on the street and then took my stuff. It was very short-lived, a period of a few seconds, but that really had an impact on me. Now, it wasn't the end of the world or anything, of course, and it wasn't that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. But feeling unsafe and then actually things happening to you is a part of life in the US. Just like in the Netherlands, you expect your bike to be stolen at some point. In the US, these things can happen to you. Now, if you are European and you've lived in Europe most of your life, and then you go to the US, you may be surprised to see how many homeless people there are outside. It is really heart-wrenching. This is because from my experience and from what I've seen, wealth inequality is a huge problem in the US. There are a small percentage of people who have everything, and then there is everybody else who has very little. And that shouldn't be the case. There should be social security. I really feel strongly about this, that we should be doing our best to take care of everyone. And needless to say, there's more of that in the Netherlands. And on top of it, what I find really sickening is this idea that lots of people have in the US that if you are homeless, it's somehow your fault, that you're not working hard enough, you're lazy, that you just decided to become addicted to drugs. Newsflash, most of the people who are addicted to drugs who live on the street become addicted to drugs because they live on the street. I mean, you need to find a way to deal with that. And if there were maybe more social programs to help people, then maybe this would be less of a problem. And finally, continuing on that note, I want to talk about how I feel that in a lot of instances, the US as a country just does not value people as much as they value businesses and profits. This sounds harsh, but it is true if you look at some of the cases like the incarceration rates in the US, where people who are incarcerated they work in prison, and they work for really low wages. These are well below minimum wage, and they're not sustainable in any way. So that is one. And then on top of it, add the fact that the death penalty is still a form of punishment in 27 US states. That is more than half. So this is obviously a point that has more to do with ideals and the system and society, as opposed to my personal experience, but it is still something I don't agree with. And as a member of society, you engage with these topics. And I find that here in the Netherlands, where they don't have the death penalty, where the prisons are actually empty and being repurposed for other things. Like in Utrecht, there's a prison that has been converted into office buildings. That's actually pretty nice. I went in and was like, this is a nice place. Anyway, so this is obviously a difficult topic to talk about, so I'm going to leave it at that. But all I want to say is that if you live in a country where things are different, a little better, I would like to hear about them, first of all, in the comments. And second, I think it's a great time to think about these things and be grateful for what we have. If you live in a society that matches with your ideals, that's not something to take for granted.